Yes, he has Parkinson's, and yes, his mobility is completely different than it used to be, but he's not.
No one expected Kelly Osborne to go silent after the death of her legendary father, Ozzy Osborne. The world knew Ozzy as the Prince of Darkness, a heavy metal icon, a walking storm of controversy and chaos. But to Kelly, he was just dad. So when he passed away on July 22nd, 2025, fans held their breath, waiting for a statement, a press release, a tearful interview, but instead, there was nothing, just silence. For days, Kelly vanished from the spotlight, refusing to speak, declining interviews, ignoring public pressure. The media churned out its own theories, some sympathetic, others cruel. Was she too devastated to speak? Was the family hiding something? Was there more to Ozzy's final days than the world had seen? Then suddenly, like a lightning bolt from a clear sky, she reappeared. No grand documentary, no teary talk show appearance, just a black screen and a message so hauntingly simple it stopped people in their tracks. I lost my best friend. No name, no explanation, just heartbreak. But it wasn't just grief. That one sentence cracked open a door that the public had never dared look behind. Because what Kelly revealed next wasn't just a daughter's sorrow. It was a glimpse into a hidden world of pain, of love, of defiance, and of a man who had lived his life in the shadow of chaos, but died surrounded by love. Her words hinted at things no one had known. The private suffering Ozzy endured, the courage he showed in silence, and the bond between father and daughter that not even death could sever. This wasn't just a tribute, it was a reckoning. Behind the myth of the bat-biting rock god, behind the scandals and the madness, was a man who fought until his last breath, and the only person who truly saw it all. Every tremor, every tear, every moment of strength and fear was his daughter. What she shared would rewrite how the world remembers him. Because for the first time, Kelly Osborne wasn't just the daughter of a legend. She was the final voice of a man who had been misunderstood his entire life. And through her, the world would finally learn the truth about the man they called the Prince of Darkness. Ozzy Osbourne's public image may have been built on wild antics, deafening music, and a life that flirted with self-destruction, but beneath the chaos was a man quietly fighting a battle his fans barely understood. It wasn't until 2003 that Ozzy finally learned the truth behind the tremors that had haunted him for years. He wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of decades of substance abuse, but rather a rare genetic form of Parkinson's disease. At first, he tried to play it off. Rock stars weren't supposed to talk about weakness, but over time, the disease refused to be ignored. Daily medications became the new norm, and even those couldn't stop what was coming. As the years passed, Ozzy's symptoms worsened, his speech slurred, his hearing faded, and his mobility declined until, by 2025, he could no longer walk. But still, he performed. Still, he smiled. Still, he gave his fans everything he had. While the media fed off his image as the Prince of Darkness, very few knew how dark his days had truly become. Even his family struggled to communicate with him as his comprehension faltered. And yet, Ozzy never gave in to despair. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted to keep moving, to keep giving, to keep fighting. His announcement in 2020 that he had Parkinson's was both shocking and comforting. He made it clear this wouldn't define him, but even as he downplayed the severity, his condition worsened in silence. Fans saw canceled tours and assumed the worst, but Ozzy refused to make his illness a spectacle. Every public appearance was a carefully masked struggle. Every wave, every grin, every song was filtered through pain. Kelly watched her father slip further into physical decline, but she never saw him lose his spirit. In fact, the quieter he got, the stronger he became. He was no longer just battling disease. He was fighting the weight of public perception. He didn't want to be seen as broken. He wanted to be remembered as brave. And in those final years, even as Parkinson stole his voice and his movement, Ozzy proved that his legacy wasn't just about what he did on stage. It was about what he endured behind closed doors. This wasn't just a musician growing old. This was a warrior facing the one opponent he couldn't outshout: time. Ozzy Osbourne's final years weren't just filled with hospital visits, treatment centers, and whispered rumors. They were a masterclass in resilience hidden behind sunglasses and a shadowy grin. While headlines speculated about his health, throwing around grim predictions and twisted rumors, very few people knew the truth behind the closed doors of his Buckinghamshire home. Ozzy was in constant pain, enduring a body that betrayed him day by day, and yet still planning one final act. The flu that landed him in intensive care in 2019 was only the beginning. Then came pneumonia, a brutal fall that shattered his back, the cancellation of world tours, and a controversial treatment trip to Switzerland. And just when it seemed like life had taken everything from him, he stepped back into the spotlight, not to announce defeat but to deliver a final performance. Just over 2 weeks before his passing, Ozzy gave what no one knew would be his last show, and it wasn't some grand farewell tour. It was intimate, raw, and terrifyingly beautiful. His voice cracked, his movement was minimal, but the power was there, not in his body, but in his presence. That night, he was the Prince of Darkness one last time. But to Kelly watching from the wings, he wasn't a rock icon, he was a father giving everything he had for one last connection. Behind the applause, she saw the struggle, the silent winces, the hidden tremors, the exhaustion that nearly overtook him. And when he smiled at the crowd, she knew he was hiding a storm behind his eyes. The media didn't see it. They were too busy printing lies about secret euthanasia plans, staging clickbait about deathbed pacts between him and Sharon. But Kelly knew those stories were as fake as the AI-generated videos pretending to show him in his final moments. None of them showed the truth. The truth was that he chose dignity. The truth was that he chose music. The truth was that he chose to say goodbye in his own way, on his own terms. That performance was a love letter to his fans and to his daughter. It wasn't about legacy, it was about closure. And when it ended, the man who had defied death 100 times finally allowed himself to rest. When Kelly Osborne finally broke her silence, she didn't do it with a dramatic interview or a red carpet confession. She did it with a black screen, a few haunting words, and a silence that spoke louder than any scream. I lost my best friend. That's all she wrote, but in those 5 words, a lifetime of love, heartbreak, and finality came crashing down on millions who followed their story. It wasn't a PR move. It wasn't crafted to go viral. It was raw, painful, and disturbingly intimate. The post hit social media like a silent explosion. No filters, no edits, just truth, and that truth lingered like smoke in a room full of memories. Then came the second wave, lyrics from Changes, the 2003 duet she had recorded with her father. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. 22 years after they first sang about transformation and letting go, Kelly was now using that same song to say her final goodbye. For fans who remembered the teenage Kelly nervously singing beside Ozzy on stage, the post was like a punch to the heart. But for her it was more than nostalgia. It was a sacred moment. That song had bonded them through generations, and now it served as a musical tombstone etched with grief. What made it so powerful wasn't just the song, it was the silence around it. Kelly didn't go on a media tour. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't perform her grief for clicks. Instead, she mourned like a daughter, not a celebrity. And it was in that restraint, that controlled devastation, that people saw just how deep her pain ran. But it wasn't all tears and tributes. Within days, she pivoted from mourning to defense, calling out the disturbing wave of misinformation flooding the internet. AI-generated deepfakes pretending to show her father on his deathbed, headlines exploiting his illness, and the unthinkable accusation of a death pact between Ozzy and Sharon. Kelly came out swinging. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut deeper than any scream could. She reminded the world that this wasn't a horror movie or a YouTube conspiracy. This was real life. Her father was a human being, a husband, a fighter, a man who deserved dignity, not digital mockery. And through her grief, Kelly became his final protector, shielding his legacy from vultures who never cared to understand him. As soon as Ozzy Osbourne's health began to deteriorate in public view, the media smelled blood, and the vultures descended with twisted stories and synthetic fabrications that blurred the line between reality and exploitation. While Kelly Osborne grieved privately, the internet erupted with manufactured panic. Headlines blared Ozzy on death watch. Tabloids suggested he was being secretly sedated. And worst of all, AI-generated videos began circulating across platforms, showing eerily realistic but entirely fake footage of him gasping for breath, whispering goodbyes, and preparing for death. These videos weren't just disturbing, they were cruel. But what pushed Kelly to the edge was the grotesque rumor that Ozzy and Sharon had entered into a so-called death pact, a manufactured narrative that suggested they'd agreed to leave the world together, hand in hand, like some kind of gothic fairy tale laced with melodrama and poison. There was no evidence, no quote, no credibility, just a dark viral fantasy that people consumed like a horror film. And Kelly had had enough. She took to social media not as a grieving daughter, but as a furious warrior. She called the rumors deceptive, disgusting, and dehumanizing, and made it clear that her parents were not puppets in some online tragedy theater. These weren't characters in a clickbait narrative. They were real people, with real lives, real children, and real love. She wasn't just protecting Ozzy's name, she was protecting his humanity. And while the world has grown numb to digital manipulation and viral lies, this time it was different. Because Kelly knew firsthand how damaging these narratives could be, not just to legacy, but to memory. She had sat beside her father, listened to his final thoughts, held his hand through moments when the cameras were gone and the makeup was off. She knew the truth. Ozzy didn't fade away quietly because he was defeated. He stayed quiet because he was dignified. He didn't want to be remembered for the illness. He wanted to be remembered for the fight. And Kelly made sure the world didn't forget. Through every fake photo, every twisted rumor, and every AI fantasy, she stood tall with one mission: to make sure Ozzy's truth outlived the lies. Long before the world labeled Ozzy Osbourne as a rock icon, or the Prince of Darkness, he was a man stumbling through fatherhood, with bloodshot eyes, shaking hands, and a heart that hadn't yet figured out how to love without chaos. His first attempt at family life was with Thelma Riley, a woman he married in 1971 and had 2 children with, Jessica and Lewis. He also adopted her son Elliot, trying to build something stable in the middle of his rising fame. But stability and stardom don't mix, and Ozzy, swallowed by fame and addicted to escape, vanished into a world of tours, bottles, pills, and late-night hotel rooms. His children later admitted he was barely there, and Ozzy himself confessed that their early years are a haze of missed birthdays and forgotten milestones. But then came Sharon Arden, his manager, his partner, and the woman who would change his life forever. Their love wasn't soft or simple. It was fire and steel, fights and forgiveness, chaos and devotion. Yet out of that flame came 3 children: Amy, Jack, and Kelly. And something changed. Ozzy decided he wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. He got a vasectomy after Jack was born, claiming their family was complete. He wrote songs for his children, spent time at home, and really tried to be present. For Kelly it worked. While the world saw a drugged-up frontman screaming into microphones, Kelly saw a man who showed up to her recitals, who gave advice between gigs, who held her through heartbreaks, and who supported her when she became a mother. Their bond wasn't just blood, it was built brick by brick, moment by moment, through years of healing and growth. In 2025, during what would unknowingly be his final concert, Kelly got engaged backstage to Sid Wilson. It wasn't planned, publicized, or promoted. It was intimate, surrounded by family, with Ozzy grinning through the pain and cracking jokes that only a father could get away with. That night was more than a concert. It was a full-circle moment, a merging of old wounds and new beginnings, a final act of love from a man who once nearly lost everything but somehow held on to the one thing that mattered most: his family. Behind every scream, every scandal, every shaky step toward redemption, Ozzy was trying to be something he never had growing up: a real father. And though he never claimed perfection, in Kelly's eyes, he had already become something far more powerful: her anchor, her champion, and her forever best friend. Ozzy Osbourne didn't become the Prince of Darkness by accident. He earned the title through a lifetime of chaos, controversy, and moments so outrageous they blurred the line between man and myth. He wasn't just a rock star, he was a walking, screaming contradiction. On one hand, he inspired generations with his music. On the other, he horrified parents and politicians alike with behavior so reckless it felt like he was daring the world to cancel him. The infamous dove-biting incident during a record label meeting was the stuff of nightmares. What was supposed to be a symbolic gesture turned into a blood-soaked headline when an intoxicated Ozzy bit the head off a dove and spat it on the floor. Then, a year later, he did it again, this time with a bat that a fan threw on stage in Des Moines, Iowa. Ozzy thought it was fake. It wasn't. He bit into it, got a mouthful of blood, and had to get emergency rabies shots. But the spectacle didn't end there. Fans were obsessed, the media was outraged, and Ozzy leaned into it, selling plush bat toys with removable heads decades later like it was just another merch drop. Meanwhile, religious groups labeled him a Satanist, politicians condemned his music, and parents across America feared his influence. Lawsuits followed, some claiming his lyrics encouraged violence, even blaming his songs for suicides. The courts disagreed, but the stain never fully faded. Bandmates sued over royalties. songwriting credits, and creative betrayal. One particularly bitter fallout led to his management re-recording entire albums to erase the original musicians, a move that split the fan base and damaged friendships. Even his relationship with Black Sabbath guitarist Tony Iommi soured and led to a legal fight over the band's name. Ozzy didn't flinch. He took the hits, gave some back, and kept going. And yet, behind all the madness was a man unraveling. Fueled by substances, plagued by inner demons, and constantly oscillating between fame and self-destruction, Ozzy didn't hide his chaos, he amplified it. He once drunkenly urinated on the Alamo, dressed in Sharon's clothes. He confessed to ending his own pets under the influence. These weren't stories created for shock value. They were real, disturbing, and painful. And yet, even with his reputation in flames, Ozzy never stopped being Ozzy. His authenticity was magnetic, his unpredictability addictive. He didn't just walk the line, he lit it on fire and danced through the smoke. But all that fire had a cost, and only those closest to him, like Kelly, knew just how much it burned. For a man branded by the world as the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne carried a private faith and moral compass that shocked even his closest fans. While tabloids clung to his chaotic persona, painting him as a devil-worshipping anarchist, the truth was far more complex and unexpectedly human. Ozzy was baptized in the Church of England, attended Sunday school as a child, and despite his dark image, prayed before every single performance throughout his career. He wasn't flaunting religion to fit into a mold or defy expectations. He did it quietly, personally, and without apology. He even once quipped in his advice column that while he wasn't Jewish, he was circumcised, a statement that perfectly summed up his blend of sarcasm, honesty, and irreverence. But his beliefs weren't limited to faith. They extended into politics, where his convictions often collided with his public image. In 2002, he and Sharon were invited to the White House for a formal dinner. President George W. Bush, known for his conservative base, shocked everyone by publicly acknowledging and even joking about Ozzy, calling him quite the entertainer. It was a surreal moment. A man accused of corrupting youth dining at the most powerful house in the world, but Ozzy didn't let the spotlight sway him. In 2009, he called out the British Prime Minister for cozying up with celebrities, while soldiers died in war zones. In 2024, he opposed the cultural boycott against Israel, and just a year later, he signed a public letter calling out the BBC for what he perceived as biased reporting on the Gaza conflict. And perhaps most tellingly, he completely distanced himself from Kanye West in 2025 over the rapper's anti-Semitic rants, making it clear that hate speech had no place in his orbit. Even in American politics, Ozzy didn't stay silent. When Donald Trump used his music in a campaign video without permission, Ozzy clapped back, saying no political group should use his songs without consent, especially one he didn't support. This wasn't about image or PR control, this was about boundaries, about respect. And while Ozzy's music may have sounded like rebellion, his actions revealed a man who stood firmly by what he believed, regardless of whether it fit the rock star stereotype. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. And for Kelly, who watched her father be demonized for decades, these were the pieces of him she treasured the most, the parts the world never saw, the moral fire behind the madness, and the quiet defiance of a man who refused to be defined by anyone else's story. Behind the thundering music, wild performances, and iconic image of Ozzy Osbourne stood a man waging a relentless war with himself, one that almost destroyed everything he loved and came dangerously close to ending his life more than once. Addiction wasn't a phase for Ozzy. It was a full-blown way of living that hijacked his career, his relationships, and his identity for decades. He drank, smoked, snorted, and swallowed anything that promised an escape. And by the late 1970s, his substance use had reached levels that stunned even his bandmates. After being fired from Black Sabbath in 1979, Ozzy disappeared into a hotel room for 3 straight months, surviving on a cocktail of booze, pills, and cocaine. He didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't care. When he finally re-emerged, it was clear that he hadn't survived because he was strong. He survived because his body had somehow become resistant to destruction. Doctors later said his tolerance was so high it defied science, and in 2003, one even reportedly prescribed him more than 13,000 doses of 32 different medications in just 1 year. But even science had limits, and the damage was visible. Ozzy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He missed shows, forgot lyrics, lashed out at loved ones, and once even attempted to strangle Sharon during a blackout so severe he didn't remember it afterward. She didn't press charges, but the moment became a turning point. Ozzy entered rehab and began the long, painful journey towards sobriety, but it wasn't a straight line. He relapsed many times, each one darker than the last. One time he climbed onto a music executive's table during a meeting, stripped, and urinated in their drink. Another time, he urinated on a historic monument while dressed in drag. It wasn't rebellion, it was collapse. And through it all, Kelly watched her father fall apart and piece himself back together again, over and over. Eventually, something changed. By the late 2000s, Ozzy started speaking publicly about his addiction, offering real apologies to those he had hurt and forging new bonds with his children. Jack became sober and began talking openly about their shared struggles, and by 2021, Ozzy had reportedly been clean for over 7 years. For Kelly, it wasn't just a relief, it was a miracle. The man who once couldn't remember Christmases or birthdays was now present, alert, and even playful with his grandson. The fight against addiction never truly ends, but Ozzy had proven something that no tabloid headline ever could. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was finally living, and Kelly saw that. Through the relapses, the regret, and the recovery, she never stopped believing he could change. And in the end, he did. Ozzy Osbourne's redemption didn't come in a blaze of glory. It came in whispers, in quiet moments of clarity, in the stillness between chaos where he finally began to hear his own voice again. After decades of spiraling through addiction, controversy, and near-death experiences, Ozzy didn't need to reinvent himself. He needed to reclaim himself. And slowly, painfully, that's exactly what he did. By the time the 2010s rolled around, the man once defined by madness was beginning to show signs of maturity that few thought possible. He wasn't sober for the cameras. He was sober for his family, for Sharon, for Jack, for Kelly, and for himself. In interviews, he no longer hid behind bravado. He spoke openly about his relapses, about the shame he felt, and about the guilt of missing out on fatherhood the first time around. Scientists were fascinated by his DNA, wondering how he had physically survived decades of self-destruction. But Kelly didn't care about the genetics. She cared about the man. She saw the change. Ozzy was no longer the unpredictable rock star storming through hotels and stages. He was present, kind, funny, and weirdly wholesome. He played with his grandson Sydney like a man making up for lost time. He became emotional at family dinners. He gave honest advice, listened instead of shouting, and laughed, really laughed, in ways Kelly hadn't seen since she was a child. And it all came full circle in 2025, when Kelly got engaged to her longtime partner Sid Wilson at Ozzy's final concert. It wasn't a spectacle. There were no paparazzi, no headlines, just love. Ozzy joked, cheered, and smiled like a proud father, giving away a piece of his heart. It was his last show, though no one realized it yet. And in that moment, Ozzy wasn't the Prince of Darkness. He was just Dad. He was a man who had climbed out of hell and found peace in the light of his daughter's eyes. That final chapter wasn't about music or fame. It was about redemption, about proving that even the most damaged soul can change, heal, and be loved. Ozzy didn't need the world's forgiveness. He had Kelly's, and in the end, that was all that mattered. His legacy wasn't just forged on stage, it was cemented in the hearts of those who watched him rise from the abyss, bruised but unbroken, a man who had been to the edge and clawed his way back with nothing but love to guide him home. In the end, when the music stopped and the lights dimmed, Kelly Osborne didn't just say goodbye to her father. She became the keeper of his legacy, the last voice to tell the truth about the man behind the madness. Her silence in the days following Ozzy's death wasn't weakness. It was reverence, a deliberate pause before opening the floodgates of grief, memory, and love. When she finally spoke, the world heard more than a daughter's sorrow. They heard the echoes of a man who had lived 1,000 lives in one, and somehow found redemption before the final curtain call. Kelly didn't need to shout, perform, or post a slideshow of memories. Her tribute was quiet, powerful, and deeply personal, because Ozzy's story didn't end with death. It lives on in every lyric he ever screamed, every battle he ever fought, and every moment he shared with the people who mattered most. His legacy isn't just platinum records, wild tour stories, or infamous controversies. It's Kelly, standing tall in his absence, carrying the weight of a name once dragged through darkness, and now glowing with dignity. It's the family dinners he used to miss, but later never skipped. It's the laughter of his grandson, who will one day hear stories about a grandfather who once bit the head off a bat and then prayed before bed. Ozzy Osbourne defied science, logic, and expectation. He crashed through every limit and then rebuilt himself from the wreckage. And in doing so, he gave his daughter something more valuable than fame. He gave her honesty, vulnerability, unfiltered love. In her farewell, Kelly didn't just defend his memory, she honored it with brutal truth and unwavering loyalty. She reminded the world that the man in the eyeliner and crucifix wasn't a monster. He was a survivor, a husband, a father, a flawed, brilliant, unforgettable soul. As the world moves on, as the headlines fade and the rumors die, Kelly's tribute remains a testament that even legends bleed, cry, change, and leave behind stories that deserve to be told right. And in doing so, she made sure of one thing: Ozzy Osbourne will never be remembered solely as the Prince of Darkness, but as the man who found light in the end, and whose heart continues to beat in the silence left behind.